All right. 30 seconds. The suspense is building.
So
I can feel it in the chat. I imagine in the chat anyway. Yeah, I wish we could see the people who are here. As we're concluding our small talk here, if you have questions for anybody as I come up, you can't come off mute and chime in because this is an events platform and not Zoom. So instead, what you have to do, dear viewer, is type your question up in the chat, and I'll do my best to monitor the chat here as our three panelists are speaking. And I'll try to ask questions in real time as best as possible, assuming your questions actually make sense for the topic. High bar, I know. But if we don't get to them in real time, we're going to try and reserve a little bit of time at the end of our session here to do some rapid fire Q&A. So throw your questions in the chat. There's also a dedicated portion for Q&A. You can use that as well. I'll just flick back and forth between the two. And without further ado, let's get going. All right. Ready? Should we do a countdown, or does anybody have one of those like clicking things?
The gong.
Oh, wait.
All right, let's get going. Welcome, everybody. I am Kyle Coleman. I lead the growth team here at Clary, which is growth marketing, sales development, as well as enablement, the three teams that are responsible for creating and accelerating revenue. And I'm super, super excited to be here with my friends to talk about this topic that's so near and dear to my heart. I started as an SDR in technology, but close to 9 years ago. And I know I'm so firmly convicted of the fact that what I learned in my years as an SDR set me up for success for the rest of my career. And what I'm so excited about in this discussion is that we have people, Holly and Ernest and Sam, who are at different levels in their career and can all speak to the value of foundational sales skills that they learned as an SDR, as an entry-level salesperson, and how those skill sets have helped them build their careers. So that's the topic for today, is what you as an SDR are learning now and why and how it's so valuable for you moving forward with whatever you want to do for the rest of your life. So I'm going to do some quick intros. Holly Meadows-Smith, my friend and former colleague, a current account executive at Looker, started Looker at Google Cloud, started at Looker as an SDR and then graduated into the AE role, I believe, in less than a year. Is that right, Holly? Keep me honest.
It was a year, full year.
A year.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Holly, for being here. Ernest Owusu, he is the Senior Director of Sales Development at 6 Sense, building and leading the team at 6 Sense for how many years now, Ernest?
Actually, my 2-year mark was 3 days ago. So
congratulations.
Thank you.
Happy anniversary. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
And similarly, Ernest started his career as an SDR. And now, so Ernest leading teams, Holly still on the front lines as an account executive. And that leads us to Sam McKenna. Sam is the founder of #SamSales, a consulting and training agency for SDRs and sales teams and pretty much every other revenue function under the sun. Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Kyle. So good to be here.
If you're laughing at Sam's photo behind you, the urgent bird gets the worm, you should be. I laugh at it every time I see it, and I've seen it probably about 60 times now. So it still works. Thank you, Sam, so much for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Holly, as we warned you, you were going to be the first recipient of our question here. So I hope you're ready. Okay. So broad question, but curious to get your take on what you did to make yourself successful as an SDR. What were the things you did? What did you focus on? And maybe now in retrospect, what did you wish that you did in your time as an SDR?
Yeah. So when I joined Looker, I had come from doing business development at a biotech company. Before that, had done my undergrad in econ, and I had a level of technical expertise that I think geared me up to be really successful in understanding Looker as a product. So Looker itself is a data visualization tool. So I felt well positioned to pick up the product really quickly. So one of the first things that I did that I think was a little bit different than some of the other folks on the team was really try to understand the product, understand the value of the product, how it worked, how I could use the product so that I could speak to that in conversations that I was having with early stage prospects. So that was probably the first thing that had made me very successful as an SDR and allowed me to ramp really quickly into the role, and then also has been huge for me as an account executive as well. Another thing that I think was really important to me as an SDR was doing a lot of research into things that were important to the account executive. I feel like it can be easy to get on blinders and just focus on, getting that disco, getting that demo set up. But what I really wanted to understand is, what is important to the account executive? They've been doing this for a while. They know the kinds of meetings that they want, the kinds of people that they want to speak to. So making sure that, I was broadening, where I was learning from, not just siloing myself into the SDR team. Things that I didn't do that I wish that I had done was following sales cycles more closely beyond that initial discovery, because I think that would have just added to sort of my education around how to best sell even in the early stages of a sales cycle, how to position the product best from an outbounding perspective, and also would have helped me kind of gear myself up to make the transition to the account executive role all of the more easier.
That is such a great answer, Holly. And I think you hit on so many key points that is so exciting to me about the SDR role, straddling this world between sales and marketing, but also product and needing to understand what the product actually does. And I think a lot of SDRs or SDR leaders overlook product knowledge when they're onboarding and training their SDR teams. And it's such a shame in my perspective, for the reasons that you outlined, Holly. How can you really confidently write a message or have a conversation if you don't really understand the value of what you're selling? And so you're focused on learning the product that way. It's awesome to hear that it set you up. And then your purview into sales and positioning you mentioned, and messaging, but also what you wish you would have done, getting more of insight into the sales process, all things that are possible in the SDR world. You just need to design the role properly to allow for that kind of exploration. And that is a brilliant segue, almost as if we planned it, to Ernest. Ernest, I want to get your take on how you design your SDR role to allow for that kind of visibility, but also kind of going back to Holly's point, when you're interviewing, when you're hiring new folks, what are the things that you look for in terms of mindset, not necessarily in terms of experience? So how do you design your roles, and then how do you hire?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's so easy to I think people naturally just want to look at the more tangible things, as your experience as a salesperson, or if you go to a great renowned school, whatever it might be. But coming from my own personal experience, when I jumped into the SDR role a couple years ago, like that, I was not your prototypical. I had low business acumen. I just finished up wrapping up a professional football career. Know very much of what I was talking about. But the strong set that I had that helped me transition to role was my mind, was my discipline, was curiosity, a lot of these intangible qualities, you want to call them. And what I've noticed from my end is I actually follow a book I highly encourage everyone to do. You have to look up Leading Sales Development. And in the book Leading Sales Development, it basically highlights that Salesforce thing was off the extensive research on a type qualities of the strong SDRs. And a couple of things they noticed is having high curiosity, conscientiousness, that business acumen, a desire for growth within your role. Those qualities tend to produce high functioning SDRs and not, thrive in the beginning, but also produce revenue for the organization. So from my sense of the organizations I've built, it's been very much focused on, I don't necessarily have to have that. I was an SDR in another organization, or they came from this great, we even had a degree to we look for those mindset qualities because we know that you at least have those. We have really strong onboarding enablement on our side to make sure we hone in that and make it possible.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Ernest. And that trait of curiosity to me is number one by such a long stretch. It's really hard to teach curiosity. Everything else that we do, for the most part, on the sales team is teachable, is coachable. But that innate sense of curiosity it carries people. And what I love about what you outlined and your own personal journey is such good evidence of this. And Holly, you mentioned this as well, your biomed or biotech background, is that you didn't have the literal sales experience before you started in an SDR role. And so for those of you who are listening to this, if you feel like you can only hire people into an SDR role who have sales experience in some way, you're doing yourself a pretty major disservice. And so now I want to kick it over to you, Sam, to understand what kind of trends are you seeing? Well, first, how many SDR teams are you working with at any given time? And what kind of trends are you seeing for what makes a best-in-class team?
I think so. We have about 80 clients now at Sam Sales. So we're just rounding out our 22nd month in business. So we've scaled quickly, to say the least. But I think one of the things that we're noticing with everybody is just the idea of how to be foundationally smart, right? Making sure that we're teaching the foundations of sales. I even think about when we're working with our teams, we really want to think about process. We want to think about logic of what the process that we're teaching them. And with the logic, think about this, like if we're telling them to do something or send a sequence 2 days later or to do it a week later, why, right? And these are the moments where we can teach them the logic behind what they should be doing and figuring out how to really hone their foundational skill set. The other thing that we're seeing is really about the idea of building community, of raising your hand and asking for help, getting perspective from different teams, asking cross-functional partners for, how would this email read to you? Or you're a CMO and we're targeting CMOs. Would this messaging even resonate with you, right? Really working as a team to find out what's working for other people and making great use out of other people's experiences. I will resonate just really quick with what you just said and echo what you just said, Kyle, about looking outside of traditional sales experience. Most of the people that we have on our outsourced BDR team have no sales experience whatsoever. They used to work on the Hill in Congress. They used to be directors of marketing for, country music labels. They're just really interesting things, but they're smart and they're sharp and they're resourceful and they can go get after it. So to Holly's point with her really great background, I say look for talent in the oddest of places.
Yeah, I love that. I think I was thinking about this, and for whatever reason, I have some predisposition toward hiring former bartenders. I don't know why. I feel like no matter where I end up, I gravitate toward these people who tended bar. It's no comment on what I'm doing after this session, but it's more of a commentary on the types of skills that it takes to be successful. And for people that are in any sort of hospitality industry, they have to be successful by engaging with people, by being effective communicators, by actually listening and then responding to those people's needs. And I feel like for whatever reason, the bartenders that have become SDRs on teams that I've worked on have just rapidly grown through the org. Super interesting.
I'd say it's one of the things we even had at LinkedIn. We looked for school teachers as a great source of sales talent because you teach all day. You look for gaps and not understanding and then figuring out how to make that connection, which is exactly what we're doing with our buyers, right?
Love that. That's such a good point. All right, so back to you, Holly, now as we kind of whip around here. You mentioned that Looker is data visualization, data analytics type tool. I'm curious because you mentioned you dove into the product, you really wanted to learn the product. How did you learning the product and learning more about maybe your process, leveraging your own tool, how did that inform the way you thought about the SDR world and about sales in general?
Yeah, I think the main way that tools like that play a role for me now, or as an SDR and also now, is like organization and collaboration. Like I feel like the SDR role is, you said this earlier, Kyle, about sort of being in between sales and marketing. You have to know like who owns what and where to go to find information and then position the right information and, pulling in different people from the prospect end as well. Like, I feel like it's very collaborative. There are a lot of stakeholders and you're kind of in charge of keeping up with that organization and making sure that all of the bullets are checked as, meetings are getting set or you're reaching out to a client to get them information back. Using Looker and a data visualization tool is important from like a metrics and data perspective in terms of communicating with an account executive around, what performance is looking like, or communicating with a manager, or understanding from marketing where we're getting leads and how we can use that information in the SDR role. But then, other tools that allow for collaboration, whether it's something as simple as like an Excel document so that everyone's on the same page, you're not leaving gaps as you're transferring information as an SDR over to an account executive during that pass off, making sure that everything's super clear so that the experience for the prospect is really clean as well.
Man, very well said. And again, just to put my own little spin on this, Holly, the way that I have always thought about this is that as an SDR, you have to understand what matters to the marketing team and their metrics and their success criteria. You have to understand what matters to the sales team with respect to the more qualitative kind of desires that they have about what gets handed off to them, but then also their quantitative success criteria. And then really importantly, to the last point you made, you have to optimize for what's right for the prospect. Like if you're not doing what's right for them and you're not creating a really strong prospect or buyer experience, you're the first touch point as an SDR. You're the first way that many people interact with a human at the company. And so you representing the company in that way is really important. So now if you have the prospect and marketing and sales, and you're in the middle of this triangle and you have to triangulate between all these different points, it gives you that really interesting perspective on the business and then sets you up for really understanding what you're talking about moving forward. And so now over to you, Ernie. I want to talk a little bit about Sixth Sense and how you're using Sixth Sense to create this buying experience, because you have a really interesting data set at your disposal. So how do you leverage that in the way you work with your reps?
Yeah, it's the really good thing about using Sixth Sense is we have the ability to allow data to inform whether or not or how the BDRs or SDRs are working with teams. And for us, it's pretty black and white. If we have the ability to see that an account is in market, we have dashboards, we have reports, we have information within our own platform to be able to see that this is an account that should be going after, and here's why I actually have a conversation. And then based upon that, a lot of what we do in terms of coaching and making sure the team is using this information to ultimately convert the community is based upon the specific pieces of information that we see from the account level and basically informing or educating the other organizations more or less. So for us, it's been awesome because it allows us to, basically create more clarity into more or less of someone. And honestly, from a BDR standpoint, even from just calling it, kind of getting away from that reluctance, fear among organizations. If you have the ability to know what people care about before you call them, it's just a little bit easier to call them. So that definitely helps our team and gives them more confidence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And even that, just that little bit extra confidence and just knowing that what you're going to say is going to resonate in some form or fashion is really important. And it goes back to the point that Holly, you made first, which is that if you know that a company is searching for something across the web, you can't just say, hey, I know that you're searching for a forecasting solution. How about some clarity? You have to connect the dots between the value that they're going to get out of this. And you can't do that without, in my opinion, having a really firm understanding of your product and the pain points that your product solves for various personas. So now kind of going back to you, Sam, at a more aggregate level, because I know a lot of what you focus on in Sam Sales is about messaging best practices and assuring that what your teams are saying to their prospects is resonating and is working and is personalized, and finding that balance between quality outreach and quantity outreach. And I'm curious, how does technology enable you to do this? And what are some of the key metrics that you're looking at to evaluate success or failure?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things we unpack, right? So we rewrite the sequences for tons of our clients and outreach and sales opt and so forth. And one of the things we look for first and foremost is one, what's our subject line look like? What's the preview text look like? Kyle and I have the same brain when it comes to this stuff, that it's so wildly important because we're looking for an open rate. First and foremost, doesn't matter what's in the email if we can't get anybody to open it. And then one of the things we look for effective messaging is the value proposition. So here's a great homework exercise for you today. Look at your value proposition and read what goes out in the first email and tell me, is that specific to you, to Clary, to Looker, to Sam Sales? Is it specific to you? Does it say what Sixth Sense does? Or can you pick it up and drop it in 100 other tech platforms and what they do? And what we often find is that it doesn't say what you specifically does. It says we can get more pipeline and close it faster, and and we're like, you and everybody else. So what do you do? That's the thing I would say first and foremost. Now, the other thing we're looking at for metrics of success, obviously, number one is, are we getting an increase in open rate? Number two, are we getting an increase in reply rate? Are we getting an increase in meetings booking rates? And what I would say is, don't think that the very first stab you take at great messaging isn't meant to be the silver bullet. Like, we're A/B testing left and right to figure out what messaging and what piece of the puzzle works best. So then we can kind of smoosh, it's an official tech word, those all together, right? And make sure we've got great messaging in the long run. I will say also, make sure you understand what metrics should be. We had a client the other day who said they were disappointed in our reply rate at 8%. And I was like, Dang. And so just make sure, you set expectations with your team, what those open rate and response rates should look like. They should obviously be higher than the average of 1%, which I think it's actually just a little bit under 1%. But again, if you're getting 8, I want to talk to you guys.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sam. And then again, to take this back to the individual SDR level, I want to make sure that the leaders on this call, the individual SDRs on this call know that they should be empowered. The individual reps should be empowered to write, to come up with their own messaging, to run and structure their own tests. And the manager's responsibility is to provide the framework to run those experiments. And because the managers, more often than not, they will have graduated up from the SDR ranks. And if they try to make their teams do the jobs the same way that they did the jobs 12, 24, 36 months ago, ain't gonna work. And so that kind of testing and that kind of constant iteration has to happen in a bottoms up sort of way. And that kind of evolution always needs to find its way back into the process. And if you allow your individual SDRs to do this, you're setting them up for success so that when they move into an AE role, they can be autonomous. Or when they move into a marketing role, they know how to test messaging. Or when they move into an operations role, they understand how to do data analysis, how to make decisions based on analysis. And so this is what we're talking about, how this SDR role sets the foundation for whatever is next in a person's career. So I will get off my soapbox now and defer to the panelists again. Holly, advice. If you could give a kernel or kernels of advice to current SDRs, specifically who want to follow the same path that you did into an AE role, what would your advice be to them?
One piece of advice. I would say learn the product and get on the phone. For me, that was how I built confidence. And I really feel like the only reason I'm successful, not the only reason, the main reason that I'm successful as an account executive is because I feel really confident when I'm having conversations about the product. Sure, things can get derailed and they can ask questions that I don't have the answers to, but I feel like I have this really strong understanding of our product and its value props, which is I've learned that, as an SDR. So I would say that get that knowledge and you'll feel really confident when it comes to whatever else you end up doing at the company.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think having that confidence allows you to actually listen when people are talking. I find that when folks don't feel like they have enough confidence, typically product knowledge, and I hesitate to say product expertise because that's too high a bar, but product knowledge is certainly important here. And if you don't have that, and when you're on a cold call or when you're on a demo or a discovery call or whatever, I find that reps are not listening to the prospect, but rather they're thinking about the next thing that they should say.
Yeah.
And so it's not a conversation. And the call's recorded, so they're not taking notes, but it seems like a checklist of questions as opposed to an actual conversation that needs to happen. So the confidence in the product, the confidence in the value props, as you mentioned, Holly, and then the practice, getting on the phones. Yeah. There's no other way to do it. Unless you're earnest, you're not going to walk into a gym and bench press 4,000 pounds today. You're going to go in, you're going to start small, you're going to work your way up, constant repetition and constant practice. And so it's so important to learn by doing in this role and just getting used to failure. So enough from me. Ernest, for people that want to move into more of a management or leadership sort of track, what kind of advice would you give to them?
Yeah, sure thing. And I can kind of speak back on my experience as an SDR of kind of how I got here, right? As I mentioned earlier, when I first jumped into the role, I did not have a very high acumen. My first quota definitely reflected that. I hit like 2% of my number. So if I could give anyone any kind of feedback on what they can do or any advice on those trying to jump into an SDR manager type role, is like the minute I got to the point where I was process driven and addicted to process and always trying to find a way to hack my system and optimize it, that's when I started to realize that I was getting some significant increases in terms of my payment. I knew this is something I really wanted to double down on. So I highly encourage anyone, if you do want to kind of take the route of going SDR management, process and being very iterative, trying to find ways to every single thing you're doing. If you're really excited about that and you double down and do that in your daily life, it'll be more likely in the future. And that's kind of what I saw as I was doing.
Love that. Find a framework for repeatable success and find ways to iterate on that. And the other thing I would add, something that was useful for me as I kind of took this more management and leadership path through SDR is you have to be more energized by other people's success than by your own. And I know, Ernest, we've talked about this before. It's something we definitely have in common, where I don't care about my own individual accolades, but I get so excited when somebody books a meeting with a personalized message that they slaved over, or when somebody gets promoted into a new role that they've been working at for 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is. And like, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it because I'm a nerd like that. But that's what's fun about leadership.
Yeah, 100%. I think if you pull almost any SDR manager out there, they'll probably, we love seeing people win. If people love 100%. That, then you're probably a good fit.
Totally true. All right, Sam, same question for you. For folks that want to pursue some sort of entrepreneurial role or want to start their own business, what advice would you give them?
I'll tell you, just from an SDR perspective, as a CEO with 18 employees and all these clients, I'm still my own BDR. I still send out messages. I still rock and roll, like I did when I was just starting out in sales. Like, don't, even thinking about the advice that Holly gave about what do you want to, how do you really get started, and advice she wished she had, I would just say, like, don't move too fast out of this BDR role either. Every SDR and BDR that I've had that said, like, I want to be an AE. I'm so good at this. I want to be an AE. I've said, like, slow your roll, hang out another 6 months, print money, just book meetings like it's going out of style, really master this. Because in my role as a CEO, in your role as an SDR, as an AE, whatever, it's going to be really important that you know how to do this so well. So don't move too quickly. I think for anybody that wants to get their own business going, you really do need to know how to sell, or to have the funding to hire somebody who knows how to sell, right? How to get after it, how to ask for the business, how to hustle, how to run a process, all that's important. But those are all things and characteristics that we look for in our BDRs, right, when they're up and coming. So really important skill set that will pay off forever.
Yeah, the biggest mistake I see younger folks in particular make is moving for movement's sake. I feel like I need to be doing something different, and so I'm going to do whatever first comes to me. And I'm like, no. I understand this is not an easy thing to do for 24 months or whatever it may be, but let's really think deeply about the experiences that you want to get in the next phase of your career, and just really make sure that that next thing is aligned with those experiences. And if it's not, and you find that you're just moving for movement's sake, I've got a handful of, not horror stories, but a handful of stories about people who ended up thinking that they were ascending and then ending up taking a step back or a step down because they made a hasty move that really wasn't aligned with their own internal motivators. So that's really sage advice, Sam.
Great advice, Carl.
Okay. We have a couple minutes left. We have a question for you, Ernest, from the chat from a gentleman named Frank. He's curious about your time in the NFL and what that taught you about team dynamics and how you bring that into your leadership role.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think if there's one thing I learned from that experience is culture wins, whether you want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
I think people kind of talk about culture as a thing that you should have, and everyone knows you should, into your organization. But I've seen situations where, you've had the most talented team, everything's in order for them to win, but if they didn't have culture, everyone wasn't bought into it. They didn't. With how I kind of run my teams, I've always made sure no matter what, we actually reinforce it literally every single week of what our culture is, what we stand for, how we're all determined to win. So the teams I've built, and honestly, if you think about it as well, like in those hard times where maybe there's a seasonality aspect where people aren't hitting enough, we had COVID last year. People were kind of freaking out, obviously, with how the organization was going to be impacted by the pandemic. The culture is always the thing that keeps the team intact. So I'd highly encourage you to take that piece, because I pulled it from my NFL experience.
Such great advice. Totally agree. I'm going to get back to questions in the chat now. Holly, for you, thinking back to your time as you were onboarding, so however many years ago this was, what was it, 3 years ago as you were onboarding as an SDR, maybe a little bit more?
3.5 or so.
3.5? What can you think of one particularly useful thing that you did during your onboarding that you feel like set you up for success? You've mentioned product knowledge, you've mentioned fearlessness of getting on the phone, but any exercise that you thought was valuable or anything spring to mind for you?
I don't know if this is the kind of answer somebody's looking for, but someone made a point about, being obsessed with process. I got really obsessed with like organization of what I was doing territory wide, what I was account executives what I was doing day to day, so that I was optimizing everything that I was doing. And I think a really good time to do that is during the onboarding process, because you're just learning what all of the steps are, and you're having those conversations with your new account executives around what's important to them. And so you're capturing all of this information and just making sure that you're organizing as you go through that process, I think will mean that, day one, when you're starting to actually book demos and calls and stuff, you don't have to worry so much about the process piece. You can focus on, that product education or getting confident on calls and things like that.
It's so key. Not the sexiest thing in the world, but good organization goes a very long way. And again, is a skill set that will serve you really well no matter what is next for you. Last question for you, Sam, as we close here. Best piece of advice for SDR managers looking to help their team members grow without seeming micromanagey. How do you find that balance?
I think one of the things that we talk about is the idea of the factor. And what I mean by that is where managers talk to SDRs and say, every single time you go, when you get a response, an objection, something from a prospect, or you go, to your own territory of how do I build in, that's when I want you to bring something to me. So one, it's putting it into the SDR's hand to be proactive and know when it's okay to come directly, but it's also building in a process, right? Again, back to Holly's point and the idea of just process, that SDR can say, okay, I just went about this objection. I went about this. They want us to reach out in 180 days. What do I do with this? And it's such an awesome opportunity for them to collaborate without the manager peeking over his shoulder or her shoulder the entire day.
Love that. Yeah, empowering people to think. We hire people with brains. We don't just hire people who can dial phones, and really creating spaces for them to collaborate, to think with each other, strategize with one another. Again, this kind of teamwork component in the SDR role is what sets you up for success in whatever else is next for you. So that is all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you, Ernest. Thank you, Sam. Awesome conversation. Really, really enjoyed it. And thank you all for the folks that were in the chat asking questions. You can head back over to the main stage now. Things will be kicking off in a couple of minutes, and enjoy the rest of Generation Revenue. Bye, y'all.
Thanks.
And we can all leave.
Great. Thank you, Ernest. Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate it.
You did great. Great job, Kyle.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye, you guys.
Bye now.